You stand at the edge of a quiet square. The air is unnaturally still, as if history itself is holding its breath. The stones beneath your feet are slick with morning dew, but you barely notice the wooden stake ahead steals all your attention. It juts upward, alone, anchored in a mound of straw and tinder. You've seen punishment before, heard the clang of iron chains and the murmurs of crowds, but this feels different, heavier, as if something enormous is curled invisibly in the fog, waiting to pounce. Honestly, when I first read this story, I had to pause and just sit with it for a while. I mean, one execution. Sure, history is littered with them, but this one, it lit a spark that still hasn't gone out. If this kind of story hits you like it hit me, consider subscribing and, hey, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, or just say hi. I read them all, even the one from that guy who listens during his 4 a.m. jogs in Iceland. All right, now let's slow things down and step into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward. It's the year 1431, in the French city of Rouen, and you're not the only one gathering. Townsfolk are streaming in quietly, their eyes darting toward the scaffold. No one really speaks. There's just the rustle of cloaks and the distant clop of a horse's hooves. Somewhere, a bread seller hawks her last loaves in a half-hearted tone, but even she seems offbeat today. This is no ordinary execution, and in your bones, you know it. The woman about to be burned isn't a criminal, at least not in the way the crowd understands crime. She's been called a heretic, a sorceress, even a cross-dressing demon, but also, by some, a saint. That contrast, it makes you shiver. The officials arrive late. They always do. Robes swishing, eyes narrowed, faces molded into the same bureaucratic frown. They whisper among themselves. Latin phrases pepper the air like mosquito bites, sharp. Annoying. Not really meant to be understood by the people who will actually watch this fire. Now she appears. Small, slighter than you'd imagined. Not fierce or wild-eyed. She doesn't stumble, doesn't cry, just walks calmly, even gently, like she's heading to a chapel. You expect her to scan the crowd, to look for sympathy. But no, she's looking upward, as if her mind is already someplace the rest of us can't follow. She's 19, Joan of Arc. But she's not that yet. Not the icon on prayer cards or the bronze statue in the public square. Not yet the martyr, the myth. Right now, she's just a condemned girl, surrounded by people too afraid or too comfortable to stop what's about to happen. The stake is taller than she is. The executioners mutter to one another as they secure her. You wince as rope pulls against her wrists. A friar leans in, muttering last rites. She nods, barely, then she speaks. Not in protest, not to curse. She asks for a cross. Someone in the crowd, maybe even you, hands one to a soldier. He passes it along. She kisses it. That's when something shifts in the crowd. Not loudly, not enough to start a riot, but subtly, like the way silence can suddenly feel electric. Someone whispers, "She's not afraid." Another voice answers, "She's praying for us." Even the executioner hesitates, only for a second, but you see it. The flames start low. There's the crackle of dry straw catching, a flash of heat, then smoke coils upward, thick and oily. You taste it on the back of your tongue, bitter, like burning cloth and something else you can't place. Maybe hope? She cries out once, not in fear, but in praise. "Jesus, Jesus." And then it happens. She looks straight out into the crowd, maybe at you, and she says, with clarity that cuts through the smoke, "Hold the banner high, so I can see it as I die." You don't understand it. Not completely, but it wrecks you. That banner white, painted with lilies and saints, was hers, carried into battle, not as a weapon, but as a promise, to keep fighting, to believe in something invisible. Now it flutters just beyond the firelight. A soldier raises it high. She sees it, and then she's gone. There's no scream, just smoke. You stand there, stunned. The crowd doesn't move. No one cheers. No one claps. You hear someone sob softly. A child asks their mother why the lady had to die, and no one knows what to say. Here's a mainstream fact: Joan of Arc led French troops to a critical victory at the Siege of Orleans in 1429. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was a tactical presence, commanding men far older than her. Here's a fringe detail. There are unconfirmed accounts that her heart didn't burn in the fire. Some say it was found whole among the ashes and quietly buried by a priest. Historians still argue whether her execution was purely political, a religious power play, or the desperate move of an occupying force that feared a teenage girl more than an army. But for now, all you know is this: something just happened, something unrepeatable. You watch the smoke climb skyward and wonder how the world will go back to normal after this. You turn to leave but stop, because the soldier holding the banner, he's crying. And you suddenly realize this isn't the end of her story. Not even close. You take a few steps away from the square, but you can't quite shake it. That image, the girl tied to the stake, eyes lifted toward the sky, flames wrapping around her, but never seeming to consume her soul. It follows you, lingers in the smell of smoke clinging to your cloak, haunts the rhythm of your footsteps on the cobblestones. But to understand how you got here, how the world came to this moment, you have to go back. Not years, not even decades, just 1427, to a dusty village in eastern France. Domremy, a blink and you'll miss it kind of town. You pass stone cottages with straw roofs, fields dotted with sheep, and a sleepy little chapel that's seen more weddings than war. Yet one girl here is anything but ordinary. You walk past her as she carries a bucket of water. She's barefoot, skirts muddy, and humming something under her breath. No guards, no advisors, no sign of the extraordinary. Just a 15-year-old named Jean. But at night she hears voices, and no, not the kind that drift in from neighbors or echo in dreams. These are sharp, distinct, and full of command. Saints, she says, specifically. Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. They don't tell her to pray, they tell her to act. You sit with her on a hay bale one evening as she confides in her uncle. She doesn't speak like a teenager. She speaks like a commander. I must go to the Dauphin, she says. He needs me. God has chosen me to lead France. Now, imagine your niece says that over dinner. You'd probably drop your fork. Her uncle does too, metaphorically. He blinks at her. Yes, her. Here's your mainstream fact. France was in the middle of the 100 Years' War. The English occupied large swaths of French territory. The crown was contested, moral, practically compost, and this is where the whisper starts to become a wave. Joan, let's start calling her that, manages to get an audience with a local military commander. She tells him she must go to Charles, the Dauphin, the man who believes himself heir to the throne of France. The commander laughs at first, but then doesn't, because Joan doesn't flinch, doesn't blink. She looks him square in the face and tells him, calmly, that she will see the Dauphin crowned at Reims, which makes no sense. Reims is deep in enemy territory. Crowning a king there would be like trying to throw a wedding in the middle of a war zone. But Joan insists, and somehow, improbably, she convinces him to let her try. The journey to the court is long, filled with political snags and logistical nightmares. She dresses as a man for safety easier to ride, harder to be recognized, and let's be real, safer in every possible way. That decision, it'll come back to haunt her later. When she finally arrives, she's not immediately welcomed. Of course not. She's a peasant. She has no military training, no royal blood, but she has that strange, magnetic certainty, like someone who sees the path before anyone else does. The Dauphin Charles decides to test her. He hides himself in a crowd of courtiers, then watches as she walks into the room. She doesn't hesitate. She walks straight to him, kneels and says, "God send you a good life, gentle Dauphin." Now that gives people pause, because no one told her which man was Charles. And yet, she knew. Here's a fringe detail. Some say Charles himself was deeply insecure about his claim to the throne, that Joan, somehow, whispered things to him that no one else could have known, fears he'd never spoken aloud. Maybe, maybe not, but whatever she said, it worked. Soon she's armored, mounted, at the head of an army. You hear the mutterings behind closed doors. A girl in command, and yet the men follow. Because when she rides into a camp, something shifts. The soldiers stop gambling. They attend mass. They speak of miracles. And when she leads them to Orléans, they win. Not eventually, not barely. They win decisively. Cannons roar. Banners wave. Joan charges forward with her standard flying. She doesn't carry a sword, at least. Not often. She carries the banner, that same one she'd asked to see before her death, even when she's wounded by an arrow. She returns to the field the same day. Her presence lifts hearts, steadies hands, and makes the impossible feel inevitable. Historians still argue whether Joan was a military genius, a strategic tool for morale, or simply a lucky talisman of war. But as you march beside her, hear the chants of victory, and see Charles finally crowned king in Reims, just like she predicted, it's hard to deny something incredible is happening. But with every victory, the noose tightens. You catch whispers in the wind, nobles jealous of her influence, clergy disturbed by her visions, English forces calling her a witch. The tide is already shifting, and one night, as Joan kneels alone in prayer, you hear her whisper something soft. Will they betray me? 2. You want to tell her no, that France will protect her, that Charles will stand by her, but you can't, because you've seen the stake, you've smelled the smoke, and you already know what's coming. Still, for now, the bells of Reims ring loud, the people cheer, and Joan, just a teenage girl who once heard saints in a field, smiles, like someone who still believes she's doing God's work. You almost believe it too, until you spot the shadow of an English banner on the horizon. You ride with her now, not at the front. Not quite brave enough for that, but close enough to feel the vibration of her horse's hooves in your chest. The triumph of Reims is still fresh, clinging to your skin like perfume and ash. But the mood has shifted. You hear it in the hooves slowing, in commanders muttering behind canvas tents, in Joan's own silences that last longer each day, and then it happens. Capture. It's not on the battlefield, not even during a grand campaign. It's at Compiègne, a small town with more gates than soldiers. May of 1430, Joan rushes to defend it, as she always does without hesitation. You follow her into the fray, but this time, the enemy is ready, the Burgundians, allies of the English. Circle fast, like wolves, and when Joan tries to retreat through the gate, it slams shut, locked by her own side. You freeze. She's still out there, trapped, fighting, screaming, but someone, maybe by order, maybe by fear, has barred the gate. You never hear her accuse them. Never see her plead. She's dragged from her horse, kicking, cursing, but mostly stunned. That's when the betrayal really begins. Because Joan, despite everything she's done, crowning a king, lifting sieges, walking through fire, is treated like a nuisance. Charles, the man she helped place on the throne, doesn't negotiate for her release. He doesn't send troops, doesn't write letters, just lets her rot in a cell, while Burgundy sells her to the English like a prize animal, and so begins the trial. You're there, in the damp hall of the castle at Rouen. It smells of mildew and old blood. The judges sit in heavy robes, but their faces aren't heavy with thought, they're smug. They've already decided. You can feel it. Here's your mainstream fact. Joan's trial was led by Pierre Cochon, a pro-English bishop with a flair for theological entrapment. He presided over 70 charges ranging from witchcraft to dressing like a man. Here's a fringe detail: the court barred any French-speaking advisors from helping her. She had to defend herself in Latin and church French against scholars trained to twist her words like wet cloth. And yet, you watch her stand, unshaken. No lawyer, no allies, just her, in chains, answering questions meant to confuse and condemn. Do you know if you're in God's grace? That one's a trap. Say yes, that's pride heresy. Say no, that's an admission of guilt. Either answer is damnation. She pauses, and then delivers a line that slices the room in half. If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me. The judges blink. You want to cheer, but you don't. No one does, because this isn't a real trial. This is theater, ritual, a liturgy of condemnation. The questions keep coming, looping, circling back. They needle her on the voices. Were they real? Were they lies? Did she dress as a man? Yes, because it was safer. Did she sin? She doesn't think so. Did she abandon womanhood? She says, God called her this way. You sit through day after day of this. The room stays cold, no matter the season. A rat scurries past your foot once. You try not to read meaning into it. Historians still argue whether Joan believed in everything she said or simply refused to betray it. But her consistency is startling. She never once throws the voices under the cart, never blames her visions, never begs for mercy. She holds the line until the torture is threatened. You see it in her eyes. Something breaks not faith, but endurance. They show her the instruments. She doesn't scream, but she signs a confession. Says she'll stop wearing men's clothes. Says the voices were not divine. But here's the thing. You visit her the next day, expecting to find her in a dress. She's not. She's wearing the same old tunic and trousers. The guards claim she put them on herself. Others say they tricked her, left them in the cell, and took the rest. Either way, it's enough. Enough to charge her with relapse. Enough to declare her a backslider, a liar, a heretic again. And this time, there's no second chance. They tell her she'll burn, and she nods. You watch her that night, sitting against the wall of her cell, tracing something into the stone with a fingertip. Maybe a cross, maybe a name, maybe nothing at all. A priest visits. He tries to comfort her. She listens politely, but her face says, I've already made peace. You want to ask her, are you afraid? But you don't, because the answer is obvious. Not of death, not of the fire, of being forgotten. And in that courtroom, in that twisted parody of justice, you understand the true execution didn't happen at the stake. It happened here, in the quiet abandonment of a girl by the men she helped raise to glory. You wake before dawn. The prison stones still damp with dew, the air too quiet. Rouen is hushed like a city holding its breath. You know, today is the day. Everyone knows. The guards walk slower. The priests murmur prayers under their breath. Somewhere, someone drops a bundle of firewood, and the crack of it echoes like a shot. You follow the footsteps, hesitant. They lead you to the old marketplace, a space that normally smells of onions and gossip, now filled with the sour sting of tar and singed rope. The scaffold looms ahead, built not for spectacle but permanence. They want people to remember this. Joan is already there, not struggling, not screaming, just present. She's dressed in a simple white robe, tied at the waist. No armor, no banner. Her hands are bound, but her head is high. You wonder if she feels the eyes on her, hundreds of them. Some watching with pity, others with spite. Many just curious. The bishop stands beside her, reciting a prayer you've heard 1,000 times. But this morning, it feels like a betrayal. You scan the crowd. No sign of Charles. No soldiers. No royal seal. Only silence. A man reads the charges, one final time relapsed heretic. sorceress, false prophet, idolater, cross-dresser. You want to yell that these are contradictions, that they don't even make sense, but your voice feels small, and then they tie her to the stake. You expect fear, maybe tears. Instead, she asks for a cross. A soldier hesitates, then grabs a wooden cross from a nearby altar and holds it up so she can see. Another, more moved, makes a small crude one from 2 sticks and places it in her hands. She clutches it close. Here's your mainstream fact. The execution of Joan of Arc was conducted by civil authorities, but under church jurisdiction, allowing both institutions to share the burden of blame and claim none of it. And your fringe detail. Some accounts say the fire was built high and fast to suffocate her before the flames could take her. A strange mercy in a brutal time. The flames begin low, licking at the straw. Smoke rises. Joan doesn't scream. She says one thing, over and over, through the thick, rising smoke. Jesus, Jesus, until the words are lost in the crackle and roar. You turn away, you have to, but the crowd doesn't move. Not at first. They stay long after the fire has burned down, even after the ash drifts into the wind like soot-colored snow. No one speaks. A soldier walks past you, face pale. "I think we killed a saint," he mutters. Historians still argue whether Joan was martyred, manipulated, or merely misunderstood by the systems that feared her. But you, standing in that marketplace, know one thing with certainty. Whatever she was, she didn't deserve this. The English burn her remains twice more to prevent relic collection, then scatter her ashes in the Seine, as if water could erase a fire so bright. But it doesn't. You travel through towns in the weeks that follow and hear her name whispered in taverns and churches, drawn in chalk on alley walls. Not saint, not heretic, just Joan, a girl who believed too fiercely, and that belief it spreads like embers caught on the wind. Charles, the man she once crowned as little, but you catch a whisper he regrets letting her go. Perhaps, or perhaps he simply fears what her story might say about him. In Paris, artists begin sketching her likeness. In Lorraine, peasants name daughters after her. And in distant villages, children play at being Joan, not queens, not princesses, Joan, the girl who heard voices and dared to lead. You're back in Domremy now. The chapel looks the same. The fields too, but they've renamed the square after her. Someone carved her name into the stone rough. Uneven, but unmistakable. And as you sit there, letting dusk fall around you, you realize the execution didn't end her. It amplified her. By trying to silence her, they made her unforgettable. You close your eyes and hear the same voices she claimed to hear, not saints. Maybe, but echoes of conviction, a faith that bends but doesn't break. And just when you think the story's over, someone approaches you. A monk, soft-spoken, nervous. He tells you, there are rumors that the church will look again at her case. You raise an eyebrow. Why he leans in? Because too many people remember her, and not the way they wanted. The fire may have consumed her body, but her story, that's just beginning. You travel again, but this time it's not with urgency or war drums in the distance. You travel with paper, with parchment, with signatures and seals. 20 years have passed. 2 decades since the fire. The world has changed, but her shadow hasn't faded, it has grown. They call it a nullification trial. But you feel the tension in the air. This isn't just a quiet reevaluation. This is a reckoning. The church is nervous. Charles is older now, heavier, less golden than he once was. Maybe guilt weighs more than crowns. He orders the investigation to begin. Perhaps to clear her name, or maybe to clear his own. Hard to say, even harder to care. What matters is this: for the first time, the truth is invited back into the room. You sit in on the hearings. You listen as dozens of witnesses, soldiers, villagers, priests, Even her childhood friends testify under oath, and what they say, you already know. They talk about her kindness, her courage, her strange certainty, how she never once hesitated in battle, never flinched when lightning split the sky, how she wept at the sight of wounded horses. One woman remembers Joan rescuing a bird from a battlefield. She said every soul deserved mercy, the woman whispers, wringing her hands. You can see the scribes frowning, their pens hovering. What do you do with a war hero who cried over birds? Here's your mainstream fact. The nullification trial in 1456 was authorized by Pope Calixtus III. It overturned the original verdict, declared Joan innocent, and condemned her execution as politically motivated and legally unsound. And your quirky detail. A doctor testified that her voices were probably caused by vapors of the spleen. Yes, the spleen, apparently. That's where divinity lived before neurology came along. The court reviews every charge, every twisted theological knot they tied around her. And as the testimony pours in, you realize something. Her story, once controlled by her enemies, is now being reclaimed by her people. Still, not everyone is pleased. Some judges mutter, some bishops shift uncomfortably. We can't just undo history, one says. But you know what Joan would say. You can't undo it, but you can rewrite it. You can choose what stays and what burns. The verdict comes down nullified. She is no longer a heretic. She is no longer condemned. She is free. Too late to save her, but not too late to save her story. And yet, even with her name cleared, the world still doesn't quite know what to do with her. Joan doesn't fit, not neatly. She isn't gentle enough to be a saint, not wild enough to be a rebel. She fought like a knight, prayed like a mystic, spoke like a prophet, and dressed like a soldier. Historians still argue whether she was the last medieval mystic or the first modern revolutionary, whether her visions were divine, delusional, or something in between. But whatever she was, she didn't ask permission, and maybe that's what scared them most. You return to the place where she died. It's cleaner now, quieter. They've built a plaque. There are flowers. Someone left a doll in a white robe tied to a stick. Children come to lay candles. Tourists murmur, take photos, walk away whispering. Can you believe she was only 19? 19, you linger. You remember her voice, how calm it was, how clear, how alive. You wish you could talk to her again, ask her something small. Did you know how far your story would go? But maybe she did, because in the decades after her death, the world kept calling her back. In paintings, in poems, in quiet prayers whispered during storms. Her banner, remember that white one with Jesus, and the fleur-de-lis gets copied across France. It becomes a symbol not just of war, but of faith in the impossible. Faith in something bigger than law, or fire, or kings. You hear a woman at the edge of the square whisper to her daughter. She heard voices, and they didn't like that. The daughter tilts her head. Who's they? The mother shrugs. Men power. Anyone who fears a girl who doesn't ask for permission, you smile. The story's changing. Again, Joan is no longer theirs. She never was. She's yours. Ours. Everyone's a story passed down. Not because it's safe, but because it still stings, still matters. You feel the air shift as dusk arrives, warm and heavy. The square empties slowly. A child runs past you with a toy sword and shouts, "I'm Joan, you be the English." You let him win. Years fold into centuries, and the ground where she once stood is now paved in smooth stone and parking lots. But her name never really disappears. It waits, sometimes quietly, like a whispered promise buried in the spine of a history book. And then suddenly it erupts. It's the 1800s now. France is fractured. Again, empires rise and fall like messy pastries on a bakery shelf. And in the chaos, one group of thinkers and leaders, priests and poets. All reach back not to kings or emperors, but to her, to Joan. You walk the streets of a changing Paris and see her face painted on crumbling walls, her name scrawled in protest leaflets, her story adapted for every new cause. Monarchists claim her as a patriot. Republicans call her a people's champion. The church lifts her higher. While revolutionaries hold her banner without irony, you think, can a single story wear this many masks? Here's your mainstream historical fact in the 19th century. Joan of Arc became a national symbol of France, championed by both royalists and republicans during times of national crisis, especially after the humiliating defeat of France in the Franco-Prussian War. And your quirky tidbit, the famed composer Tchaikovsky wrote an opera about Joan, in Russian, with a plot that veered wildly into romantic fiction, including a doomed love story with King Charles. Historians groaned, audiences wept. Joan, presumably, raised an eyebrow from beyond. You find her statue in Paris, bronze and bold, astride a rearing horse, sword lifted high. It sits in Place des Pyramides, and people pass by without glancing. But sometimes someone stops, a schoolgirl in a navy skirt, a weary mother with grocery bags, a man in a beret scribbling poetry. They all pause, they all look up, and for a second, you see it, the recognition, the connection, the shared understanding that courage isn't always loud, and it isn't always safe. Sometimes it's just standing when the world begs you to kneel. The scholarly debate now is less about whether she mattered, and more about why. Why does she persist? Why does this teenage peasant girl echo through time like a bell struck deep in the earth? You walk through a museum and see her image in paintings, sometimes idealized, sometimes raw. Joan weeping, Joan blazing, Joan floating in golden light, her eyes fixed on a future she'll never see. One canvas stops you cold. It's not grand or dramatic. It's small, almost overlooked. Joan sits on a stone wall, barefoot, quiet, holding her sword in her lap like a violin she doesn't know how to play. There's a faraway look in her eyes. Not victory, not martyrdom, just waiting. You think about all the women history tried to forget, and all the men who tried to rewrite them. But Joan, she keeps walking through the centuries like a barefoot ghost in armor. France declares her a national heroine. Schools teach her name. Towns erect statues. Her childhood home becomes a pilgrimage site. And yet, something about her still refuses to be boxed in. Every time someone tries to own her legacy, it slips through their fingers. You find a quote scratched into a train station bathroom near Orléans. She wasn't made to be understood. She was made to be remembered. The more the world modernizes, the more her medieval fire burns brighter. It's as if the more complicated our lives become, the more we crave the kind of clarity she had, the audacity to believe in one voice, internal or divine, and follow it through mud, flame, and silence. You visit the small chapel built in her honor. Inside, candles flicker. The air smells like old wax and lavender. A woman kneels at the altar, her hand trembling as she lights a votive. You catch the name she whispers, Jean. You recognize the tremor in her voice. It's not just prayer, it's asking to be brave. Just for a moment. Just enough. And outside, in the garden, a little girl marches through fallen leaves with a stick like a sword. Her father laughs. Who are you supposed to be? She spins dramatically. Joan of Arc. He raises his eyebrows. Where'd you hear that name? School and the internet. And a dream, I think. You smile. Because somehow, in an age of screens and satellites, her story still finds the cracks, the quiet moments, the people who need her. She never gets quieter. Not really. She just waits until we're listening. And maybe the world is finally listening again. But her story isn't over, not even close. There's still a crown to place. Still a sainthood to come. Still voices in the wind, whispering to anyone brave enough to hear. You're standing now in a marble hall. Light filters through stained glass gold and crimson shards, slicing through silence. You're not in a battlefield, not in a courtroom. This is a place of ceremony. The year is 1920, and after nearly 500 years, the church finally speaks the words that echo like thunder across centuries. Joan of Arc is a saint. Yes, saint. It takes centuries of paperwork, politics, and prayer. But today it happens. Canonization. You watch the ceremony unfold in the Grand Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome, where cardinals sway, choirs hum, and incense swirls like battlefield smoke. You think, she would have hated this, and then you think, or maybe she wouldn't, because here's the strange part you don't really know. No one does. That's part of what makes her so unforgettable. Joan is never just one thing, never easily labeled. She is warrior and peasant, mystic and commander, prisoner and legend, saint and spark. Your mainstream fact. On May 16, 1920, Pope Benedict XV declared Joan of Arc a saint in front of a packed congregation. She became one of the patron saints of France, and your fringe tidbit. Some Catholic scholars had resisted the sainthood for years, because, brace yourself, they were uncomfortable with her cross-dressing. Yes, 500 years later, and some bishops were still rattled by her choice of pants. Historians still argue whether her canonization was more spiritual or political. France, after all, was trying to heal after World War I. The country was broken, grieving, in need of a symbol that wasn't stained by politics or bloodshed. And Joan, she was pure fire, untouched by scandal, unsullied by modern chaos. The perfect relic for a nation desperate to believe in something again. You drift through the ceremony, barely touching the floor. Latin chants echo off marble. The crowd presses in, a sea of hats and veils and folded hands. And then you spot someone, a girl, 12, maybe 13, with tightly braided hair and eyes that don't blink. She's clutching a small Joan medal in her fist, whispering the saint's name like it's armor. You want to reach out and tell her you have no idea how many battles this woman still fights for you, because Joan doesn't stop with canonization. You flip forward through time. It's the 1930s, then the 40s. You hear footsteps, gunfire, the whir of planes, World War II. And even now, even here her name surfaces again. In resistance bunkers and scribbled notes passed beneath doors. French freedom fighters use her image as a symbol of rebellion, of hope, of standing tall when told to kneel. One resistance cell signs its communiques for Joan, and it fits, doesn't it? Because her fight wasn't just about thrones. It was about listening to the voice that said, "Go." Even when everyone else said, "Stay down." It was about believing so fiercely that even death felt like a door, not an end. You move through decades, watching her take on new forms. In the 60s, she's a feminist icon. In the 90s, a symbol of faith and integrity. In the 2000s, she gets her own anime. Yes, really? And in the 2020s, she's on TikTok. Girls reenact her story with cardboard swords and ring lights. Some make jokes, some cry. All of them, every single one, are touching that same ancient flame. You step into a bookstore. One shelf alone is stacked with novels, memoirs, poems, all about her. And they're all different. In one, she's a time traveler. In another, a rebel against AI. In yet another, she's exactly who she was, just a girl who listened to something bigger than herself and followed it straight through the fire. You run your fingers along the spines and think, how does a 19-year-old farm girl become a prism for so many stories? And the answer is simple, because she lived without compromise. She made people uncomfortable. She asked hard questions and didn't blink at the answers. That kind of courage doesn't die. It multiplies. You walk outside and see another statue of her, this one in bronze, with a thin layer of rain on her shoulders. The sky overhead is soft gray. A single pigeon rests on her sword. A tourist snaps a photo. A child looks up, and somewhere, quietly, a girl in a village, anywhere feels a pull in her chest. The sense that maybe she, too, can change something, can move something, can be something bold and dangerous and true. She doesn't know Joan's name yet, but she will, because the fire Joan lit wasn't just for France. It was for anyone who needed to hear that voice in the dark and believe it mattered. And even now, centuries later, that fire still burns. You're tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from walking or working, but the kind that hums behind your ribs when you've been holding someone else's story too long. But Joan's story doesn't burden you, it holds you back. One last scene, one last ember. You're standing at the edge of the fire now, not the literal flames that took her body, the fire that she left behind. It's evening in Domremy. Yes, we're back where it began. The little stone village, the same cracked cobbles and crooked fence posts. The fields where the sheep still graze. Maybe not knowing their history, but sensing something old in the soil. There's a small museum here now. It's not grand, the floors creak. The air smells of paper and age. And in the corner is a simple wooden cross, worn smooth by hands. Visitors touch it without knowing why. You touch it, too, and you feel it's something quiet and steady, like a heartbeat in the wood. Outside, children run down the same paths she did. Their laughter spills into the twilight, and it feels holy. A guide, older woman, gray hair in a loose knot, leans toward you and whispers. Sometimes, I think she's still here. You nod. Of course she is, because stories like Joan's don't end. They fold into the world. They press into the earth, echo in the sky, and settle in the bones of those who are ready to listen. Your mainstream fact, France, now celebrates Joan of Arc Day every second Sunday of May. There are parades, church bells, young girls in armor costumes riding through town squares, channeling something ancient and untamed. Your fringe detail. In 2016, a controversial political party tried to claim Joan's image for their platform. France exploded with outrage because even now, centuries later, people fiercely protect the purity of her legacy. Historians still argue whether Joan's voices were divine, delusional, or metaphorical, whether she was led by saints, trauma, or sheer willpower. But that debate misses the point, doesn't it? What matters is that she believed, and that belief carried armies, crowned kings, rewrote laws, and cracked the walls of history wide open. You sit down on a bench near the church she prayed in as a child. The sun is low, shadows stretch like ribbon across the field. A breeze moves the tall grass, and it sounds like whispering. You close your eyes and imagine her walking past. Just a girl, no sword, no visions, just wide eyes and dirty feet, and something impossible growing in her chest. You follow that thread one last time into your own life, because maybe that's the quiet secret of Joan's story. It's not about war, or politics, or saints. It's about what happens when you listen, really listen, to the voice inside you. The one that says go, the one that says speak, the one that says don't stop. Maybe you don't carry a sword. Maybe your battlefield looks like a hospital hallway, or a classroom, or a street corner at night where someone needs kindness more than armor. But courage is contagious, and fire, once lit, doesn't stay still. So you walk back into your own life. Softer now, but also steelier, with her story behind your eyes, her fire tucked under your ribs. She burned once, and now you carry the match. You're lying down now, the room quiet around you. The air has stilled. Your breathing has softened. And Joan's story begins to settle less like a battle cry and more like a lullaby. You think of her again, barefoot in the grass, or armored in gold. You remember her voice, steady even when her hands trembled. You remember the fire, Yes, but also the silence that followed. The long, echoing silence of someone whose story was too big to be buried. And now, that story lives in you, not in the facts or the timelines, but in the feeling that when the world says no, and your heart says go, you can move even if your voice shakes, even if your steps are small, even if no one else believes just yet. That's what Joan knew. That belief doesn't need permission. It just needs a beginning. So let your breath slow. Let your eyelids drift. Let your thoughts slip into that soft space where dreams begin. And if you hear a whisper faint and far away, don't be afraid. Maybe it's just a girl in armor. Still walking, still waiting, still lighting the way for anyone brave enough to follow. Sleep well. Firekeeper, sweet dreams.